I still hear the echo of his laughter, and it cuts deeper than any insult ever could. My own son, standing tall in the living room I once filled with family dinners, bedtime stories, and Sunday prayers, staring at me like I was nothing but an unwelcome shadow in his kingdom. He tossed the house keys onto the floor and smirked. "You're done here, old man. This is my house now. Go find a bridge to crawl under." And then, God help me, he laughed. My son laughed as if throwing me out was some kind of joke. "My name is Clarence Williams. I'm 58 years old, a retired English teacher, a man who still presses his shirts each morning even though there's nowhere left to go. I used to believe in dignity, in the quiet power of patience, discipline, and raising a boy to be better than his father. But that belief burned to ash the night my son, David, returned from Las Vegas with $137 million in his pocket and poison in his heart. He wasn't always this way. Once, he was my pride, my boy who used to sit with me on the front porch, asking about literature, life, and love. I thought I was raising a gentleman. Instead, I had raised a gambler who believed money was the only truth that mattered. That jackpot changed everything. Suddenly, I was not his father. I was an obstacle, an embarrassment, a reminder of a time when he had nothing. That night, with nothing but a leather bag in my hand and an old photograph of my late wife tucked inside, I stepped out of the house I had built with my own two hands. The streets of Atlanta were cold, the kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin but seeps into your bones, whispering, "You are unwanted now." I thought humiliation had swallowed me whole, but life, strange, bitter life, was just preparing me for something darker, because humiliation was only the appetizer. The main course was betrayal, and it arrived in the shape of a secret I never could have imagined: my son's lover. At first, I told myself it was none of my business. He was a grown man. He could lie in whatever bed he wanted. But when whispers reached my ears, when I caught the faint trail of unfamiliar perfume lingering long after he stormed out the door, I knew I couldn't ignore it. A father knows when something is wrong. A father can smell lies even when the world applauds his son as a success story. I thought I was finished with surprises. I thought losing my home and my dignity in the same night was the cruelest punishment fate had in store. But looking back now, that was the exact second when revenge started breathing inside me. Before I carry you into the storm of what followed, let me pause here. Where are you listening from right now? Tell me your city and state in the comments. Because this story, this fight for dignity, for respect, for justice, has no borders. And if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever been humiliated by the very people you sacrificed for, then you'll understand why I could never stay silent. David's rise was fast, like lightning. A bartender scraping tips one week, a millionaire the next. But lightning doesn't shine forever. It burns, it blinds, and then it disappears. And the secret lover he thought was hidden in the shadows, that was the storm cloud waiting to strike him down. The night I found out the truth, I almost turned and walked away. Almost. But what I did instead shocked even me. I left my own porch with my leather bag and the photograph, but I didn't go far. Pride told me to keep walking, to disappear into the night like a ghost who'd learned he wasn't welcome among the living. Dignity told me to stand straighter, to keep my shoes clean even as I stepped off my property for the last time. But something older and truer than both, something forged in the marrow of a father, made me turn and look back at the lit windows. My son's silhouette moved through the house like he owned time itself. He raised a glass, laughed, and the light caught the bottle's gold label, Top Shelf Victory. I kept walking. By the time I reached the corner, the streetlights hummed and flickered the way they do when a storm is far but thinking of you. I could have called someone. I have colleagues who still teach, men from church who could have picked me up without questions, neighbors who remember when David was just a lanky boy with scabbed knees and a crooked grin. I didn't call anyone. I went to a place where I knew the coffee was strong, and the music from the tiny radio behind the register was always a little too loud. Etta's Diner sits on the edge of Mechanicsville, wedged between a pawn shop and a barber shop that's been there longer than I've been alive. The bell over the door announced me, and Etta looked up from counting the change drawer. "Clarence Williams," she said, hands on hips, bangles singing. "You look like a man who hasn't eaten since Tuesday." "Coffee," I said, "and something that'll remind me I'm still here." She slid a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes toward me before I could protest. "On the house," she said. "You can pay me with a story." I stared at the steam curling off the potatoes. "You wouldn't like this one. Try me." So I told her the bones of it, the Vegas win, the news trucks, the parade of strangers who started calling my son sir when they used to call him son, the keys tossed, the laughter, the door shutting like a verdict. Etta listened, the way Southern women do. No commentary, no quick moral, just a soft gravity that pulls you into telling the truth. "Lord," she said, at last, "money's a magnifying glass, shows you what's already there, sweet or ugly." I wanted to defend him then, to to remind the world that my son had been a boy who cried when our old dog died, a boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard like bouquets. But the words didn't come. He's not himself, I managed. Maybe he never had to be, Etta said, not unkindly. Maybe life didn't make him choose. That money did the choosing for him. When I finished eating, she pushed a paper sack across the counter. Inside was a Tupperware container of stew, a heel of cornbread wrapped in wax paper, and a tiny tin of salt. For the road, she said. You staying with family? I am family, I said. The words surprised me with their edge. She tilted her head. You got a place. There was the church. There was the empty classroom in my mind. There was the house with lights on. There was a bus route where drivers still knew my name, where retirees rode out their afternoons in peace. But there wasn't a place. I'll manage. She didn't argue. Then you come back here at breakfast, she said. I open at 5, and you can tell me a different story. When I stepped outside, the air had thinned and the street smelled faintly of rain. A bus trundled past, brakes sighing. I hopped on with my last few dollars in cash and sat near the back, one hand on my bag, the other clasping the photograph through the fabric. The driver, a round-faced man in a Braves cap, glanced at me in the mirror. You all right, Mr. Williams? I will be. The bus rolled past churches with signs that preached in plastic letters, past nail salons lit neon, past a mural of John Lewis that grows brighter after midnight. I got off near the park where David and I used to throw a baseball. It wasn't home, but it wasn't a bridge either. I settled on a bench under a lamppost that hummed like a tired preacher, and I took out the photograph. My wife, Lorna, in her Sunday dress, sunlight in her hair, a hand on David's shoulder. She died 8 years earlier, breast cancer, a quiet war that taught us both how to whisper prayers in the middle of the night. I used to tell David we survived because we stayed gentle. He nodded then like he believed me. A Mercedes slid up to the curb, engine purring. I didn't look up. Maybe I didn't want the world to see my face beneath a streetlight. But the passenger window lowered with a soft hum. Mr. Williams, a woman's voice. Careful, coated in empathy. I turned. The woman leaned out, the kind of poised elegance that wears money lightly, like perfume. She was in her early 40s, maybe, with a sleek bob and an undercurrent of nervous urgency. You don't know me, she said. My name's Lydia. I'm David's publicist. I watched her lips shape the lie. Publicist, I repeated. Can we talk? She nodded toward the cafe across the street that would be closing in 10 minutes. Just a minute or two. I followed her inside. The barista was wiping down tables, and the place smelled of cinnamon and bleach. Lydia bought 2 bottled waters. We sat by the window. David asked me to find you, she said. He's worried. That almost made me laugh. About what? That the wind might scuff his marble floors? She didn't rise to it. He wants to make this right. It's all very new, Mr. Williams. The money, the attention. People are pushing him in 100 directions. Are you one of those people? I'm one of the few trying to slow him down. She clasped her hands the way people do when they're trying to sell you sincerity. He loves you. Love doesn't throw keys at the floor and point to the door. You know what money does. She spoke softly. It makes a person act like the loudest version of themselves. Sometimes the loudest version is a frightened child. He's 32, I said, a detail like an anchor in a storm. I already raised a frightened child. She didn't flinch. Come to the house tomorrow morning. He'll be calmer. We'll talk options. Options. The word tasted like cardboard. Tell him I'll come, I said, surprising us both. When I walked back out into the night, the rain finally came, thin and steady. I found a room at the Friendly Motor Lodge off Metropolitan Parkway, a place where the carpets have seen more confessions than all the churches on the block. The clerk slid a key across the counter and pretended not to notice my suit, my shoes polished like a ritual. In room 212, I locked the door and set my bag on the chair like a guest. I ate Etta's cornbread slowly, crumb by crumb, as if I were signing my name on a contract with myself. I slept badly, dreamless, heavy. When morning came, I ironed the same shirt on the edge of the bed and knotted my tie with hands that shook once and then remembered themselves. The house looked different in sunlight, no longer a palace, just brick and wood and windows, like any other thing a storm can take. A black SUV sat in the driveway, and the lawn had the look of money's hurry, contracted and trimmed by men who wouldn't look you in the eye unless you tipped them twice. I rang the bell that used to sing a welcome and heard footsteps approach that didn't know me. David opened the door barefoot, hair tousled, in a white t-shirt that cost more than 3 of my suits. His eyes were bright with a kind of brittle gladness. "Dad," he said, as if he'd always called me that, as if last night had been a practice run for being human. "Morning." He stepped aside, guardedly. The living room looked like a magazine had thrown up. New art on the walls, aggressive, abstract, expensive, a low white sofa, 2 glass coffee tables with books no one would read. He started talking fast. "Look, about yesterday, I was celebrating. It got out of hand. People were here. Cameras, everything." He gestured vaguely toward a pair of champagne flutes abandoned on the mantel. "I shouldn't have. You shouldn't have." We stood in the silence that always follows the truth. A door down the hallway clicked shut. David's eyes flicked in that direction and then away. "New security system," he said, too brightly. "Place is wired now. You'll like it." "I'm sure I won't." He laughed, quick and empty. "Coffee? I'll take honesty." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Dad, I won $137 million. Do you have any idea what it's like to go from scraping by to this? People talk to you like you invented gravity. They nod like you're a genius. You start to believe it. You could choose not to. I tried. Last night wasn't me. I want you here. I want to set you up. Get you a condo. A car." He looked at me, hopeful as a boy asking to borrow the keys. "We can fix this. People say money changes people. Maybe. Or maybe it just rearranges the furniture so you can see what's been in the room all along." I studied my son's face, the curve of his mother's mouth, the quick thinking eyes that had always been too good at reading a room. "Fixing," I said slowly, "starts with an apology." He swallowed. "I'm sorry." "Not to me," I said, nodding at the floor. "To the house." For a moment, the boy I'd raised blinked through. He nodded. "I'm sorry," he murmured to the room. A ridiculous act, maybe, but he needed to feel small in a way that wasn't cruel. He needed to practice reverence. He looked back up. "Will you stay?" A sound floated down the hallway then, small as a dropped pin. A laugh, a voice. I knew every voice that had ever lived in this house, but I didn't know that one. It came again, not quite a whisper, not quite a song. My son went very still. "Who do you have here?" I asked, calmly. "Dignity is a blade. You use it or you bleed. Just some people." "A friend." "A friend," I repeated. "Does your friend drink champagne for breakfast?" His smile thinned. "Do we have to do this right now?" "Right now is all we ever have." Another door clicked. The hallway exhaled a thread of scent, something expensive, unplaceable, with the faintest undernote of tobacco and cedar. Not perfume, something more private than that. My instincts stirred. "Introduce me," I said. "Dad, please." "Introduce me," I repeated, and stepped toward the hall. He moved to block me, and for a heartbeat we were back on a little league field, me adjusting his stance at home plate, his body leaning into mine without thinking. This time he didn't lean, he squared. He was stronger than me now, a man with a gym body built for photographs. I didn't push him. Sometimes the smallest refusal is the loudest thing in the room. I turned away. "Where's Lydia?" I asked lightly. "She had to take a call," he exhaled. "We'll all have dinner tonight, just us. I'll make it nice." I let him guide me to the kitchen table. He poured coffee with ceremonious care. I watched his hands. Steady, practiced. He was hiding something he'd rehearsed hiding. The coffee was too hot. I didn't drink it. Halfway through his pitch about condos and an advisory board he wanted to build, my presence required, of course, the front door opened and closed. Lydia appeared, absorbed in her phone, the sleek bob removed from last night's urgency. She blinked when she saw me. "Mr. Williams, good to see you." She reached for my hand with what might have been genuine warmth, then glanced at David, a question flashing between them like light off glass. The house murmured in a new way. Good houses do that. They tell you the truth with the little sounds. Air through vents, pipes clicking. The stare that was always shy and now not. A second laugh, softer, not a woman's. And there it was. Not perfume, but cologne. That warm ember of tobacco cedar again. Closer now. Looking back now, that was the exact second when the shape of the secret sharpened, and I understood the money wasn't the most dangerous thing in the room. I stood. "Show me," I said to my son. He stared at me, then at Lydia. She looked down. "Maybe another time," she murmured, already taking a small step backward, already shifting into a lane without traffic. "Now," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the ceiling inside my chest and let the sound fill it. David closed his eyes for a breath. When he opened them, he was my boy again, scared and wanting permission to be brave. He gestured toward the hall. "Okay," he said. "Okay." We walked toward the bedroom wing, the soles of my shoes whispering against the new hardwood I hadn't chosen. Family photographs had been replaced by brutalist prints, all black angles and red smears. At the end of the hall, he paused at a door, my office door, once. He looked back at me. He knocked once, twice. The door opened. A man stood there in a gray t-shirt and linen pants, barefoot, like my son. He was good-looking in the way that makes a room rearrange itself. Early 40s, a clean jaw, eyes that had learned to emit warmth on command. He held himself with quiet assurance, the kind you buy in private rooms with soft lighting. But I knew him before my brain had a chance to find his name. The cologne fit him, as if fragrances had biographies and this one had been born on his skin. "Mr. Williams," he said, and there was surprise in his voice. "Yes, but not shame. It's been a long time." "Marcus," I said. The word tasted metallic. "Marcus Hale." Lydia's voice floated from the end of the hall. Featherlight, trying to be casual and failing. "He's here early," she said, a shade too brightly. Marcus Hale had been our financial advisor after Lorna died. He handled the modest insurance payout, arranged the small scholarships we established at the school where I taught, helped me refinance the house when the roof finally admitted its age. We'd shared coffee at this same table. He'd cried the day of Lorna's funeral, dabbing his eyes with a napkin he worried between his fingers like a child with a secret. Over the years, I'd trusted him because he seemed to understand that the math mattered less than the meaning. He'd looked David in the eye and told him to respect the work that built $1. He smiled now, a careful smile designed for rooms with cameras. "We've been working on some plans," he said, gesturing toward the office behind him. On the desk, glossy folders stood like soldiers, each with a tab printed in a font that promised a future. Trust, foundation, family office. David touched my elbow. "Dad, please don't make this weird." I watched Marcus take a step forward, then stop. He was measuring the space between us like a surveyor. I remembered him at my kitchen stove years ago, reheating the gumbo a neighbor had dropped off, telling me softly that grief is a kind of wealth you can spend only once. I'd believed him because he'd spoken it while stirring with my favorite wooden spoon, careful not to scrape the bottom of the pot. Now, I looked at the bare feet, the relaxed intimacy, the line that ran from my son's shoulder to his. Not lust, not even romance. Something more cunning than both. A partnership with a lockbox at its center. A secret with paperwork. David said, too quickly. "It's not what you think." Marcus met my eyes. "Let me speak plainly," he said. His voice had the evenness of a man who made his living on steadiness. "David and I are together. We care about each other. And we're building a structure that will keep his wealth safe from opportunists." The last word hung there like a trap that thinks it's a sentence. I didn't blink. "From fathers?" I asked. "From anyone who doesn't have his best interests at heart," Marcus said smoothly. "Marcus," I said, "because names are a slow knife. You sat in my pew at Lorna's funeral." He nodded. "And I meant every tear, Clarence." He had the gall to use my first name. "Your family means something to me." I let a small silence grow like moss. "Then you'll forgive me if I ask to see the terms." David recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "Dad, the terms," I repeated. "The ones in the folders with the expensive tabs." Marcus gestured toward the office. "Of course." He stepped aside. "Transparency is the first rule of trust." I walked past him. The office smelled like ink and cedar oil, a scent designed to say power without shouting. On the desk, the documents waited. I opened the first. The trust placed the majority of David's assets under a manager's discretion for a period of 10 years, with stipends for lifestyle and philanthropic expression. The manager, a firm with Marcus's name at the top and a web of shells beneath it, all perfectly legal, all perfectly opaque. The foundation documents were worse. A pipeline for image laundering under the banner of Community Uplift, overseen by an advisory board of 3. Names, Marcus Hale, Lydia Cho, and the third, left blank, awaiting an elder with gravitas. My name did not appear anywhere. Not as trustee, not as advisor, not even as contingent beneficiary. Not that I wanted money. Money rots if you hold it wrong. But the honesty, the erasure. "Dad," David said, softer now, as if the papers themselves could bruise. "I was going to talk to you." "When?" "After the ink dried." Marcus folded his arms. "We're protecting him. That kind of money attracts wolves," I finished. "And you wore sheep's clothing for practice." He took a breath. "Let it out. I understand you're upset. Understand this instead," I said. "You've picked a man with a father who knows how to read." Lydia appeared in the doorway like a thought you try to keep to yourself. "Can we all just lower the temperature?" she said. "There are reporters circling. This isn't the time." She was right. She was always going to be right in these precise ways. I closed the folder and lay my palm on it the way a pastor rests a hand on a Bible. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to witness. "I'll leave now," I said. "I'll pack what's mine and go." Relief flashed across David's face and hid itself like a child behind the curtains. He reached for me, stopped, let his arm fall. "Dad, I raised you to be a gentleman," I said. "Try it on. See if it fits." I walked back down the hall, past the brutal art, past the mirror that gave me back a man who still wore a tie at 9 in the morning. In the bedroom, my closet had been thinned to suits, shirts, the kind of shoes that remember ceremonies. I loaded my bag in silence. I took Lorna's scarf from the drawer and looped it through the handle. On the nightstand, the little brass clock I'd wound every Sunday ticked with stubborn grace. I slipped it into my pocket. As I was zipping the bag, a small click sounded behind me. Not the door, the tiny sound of a phone's camera. I pivoted. The mirror offered me a second of theater. My own reflection and, in the doorway, the quick angle of Lydia's arm withdrawing. She smiled, apologetic. Sorry, she said. Habit. From which profession? I asked. Crisis management. I picked up the bag. Then manage this, I said quietly. A father leaving his son's house with his dignity, and 3 wolves mistaking it for weakness. I walked out without looking back. In the living room, Marcus touched David's shoulder in a gesture that was either tenderness or choreography, maybe both. On the porch, the day had turned bright, the kind of clear blue that dares you not to believe in mercy. I crossed the lawn and didn't turn when my name followed me. At the curb, a gray Civic idled, window down, Etta's smile inside it like a lighthouse. Get in, she said. I drove by and saw the vehicles. Figured you might need a ride. God sends his angels in aprons, I said, and slid into the seat. We drove in companionable quiet. She took me back to the diner, because that's what home is when a house forgets you. She brewed fresh coffee without asking and set a slice of pie in front of me like an oath. We sat there watching the light creep across the checkerboard floor. What are you going to do? She asked, at last. I looked at the steam rising from the cup and saw, for the first time, not my humiliation but the architecture of an answer. I'm going to teach, I said. Teach what? David, I said, and the man who thinks he can own him. Etta smiled without showing her teeth. That's a fine curriculum. I took out Lorna's scarf and smoothed it on the table, the pattern of tiny blue flowers catching the light. This isn't about the money, it's about respect. About the record we leave behind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass clock. I wound it until it clicked. And time. The bell over the door rang. A teenage boy wandered in, shoulders high with the weight of being young in a world that measures worth too loudly. He ordered a cola and sat in the far booth. Etta watched him, then looked back at me. You going to need help? I'll need evidence, I said, and patience. I lifted my coffee, and one more slice of that pie. As I took my first bite, my phone buzzed. A text, unknown number, a photograph of me in my own hallway, my bag in hand, my face turned slightly away. The angle was artful, the kind of picture meant to be captioned in a gossip column. Beneath it, a message, keep your distance, this is bigger than you. I stared at the words, then I laughed, a short, soft sound that belonged to a part of me I hadn't heard in months. I typed back, bigger than a father, good luck. My thumb hovered. I deleted the message instead. Let them wait for a reply that wouldn't come. Let them learn my rhythm the hard way. Outside, the clouds gathered again in a slow procession. Inside, the diner's radio crackled with an old soul record, the bass line steady as breath. Etta topped off my mug. Ready? She asked, and she didn't mean for more coffee. Ready, I said, and I meant it, because what I was going to do next would be simple and devastating. I would invite the wolves to a table where I controlled the knives, and the first step was to make them believe I had finally decided to beg. I stood, tucked Lorna's scarf into my pocket, and picked up the brass clock. The hands ticked with a private confidence, as if time itself had agreed to lend me a favor. I walked toward the door and paused with my hand on the glass, looking out at the street that had kept me upright. Past the reflection of my own 2 eyes, a black SUV slid by, slow, a camera lens glinting behind its tinted skin. I smiled at it. Then I did something I never do. I waved. The morning after the storm in my son's house, I sat in Etta's diner, stirring my coffee until the spoon touched porcelain. People think revenge comes like thunder, loud, sudden, full of fire. The truth is, revenge is a lesson plan. You build it step by step, chapter by chapter, until even the slowest student understands. Etta wiped the counter, watching me the way only old friends can. So what's the next move, Professor? I'm going to let him think I'm broken, I said. Men like Marcus, they feed on weakness. They'll relax once they believe I've accepted my place outside the door. You can play that part. I've been playing roles my whole life. Teacher, husband, father. Now it's time to play the fool. But a fool who keeps the gradebook hidden. She slid me a slice of cornbread without asking. Then you better eat, Clarence. Hard to act when your stomach's louder than your voice. I smiled at that, because she was right. Dignity is easier to wear on a full stomach. That afternoon, I visited the library downtown. Most men in my position would run to lawyers, screaming about betrayal. Not me. I wanted to understand exactly how Marcus had built his little fortress. I sat in the financial section, surrounded by dusty volumes no one had touched in years, and copied terms into a notebook. Irrevocable trust, grantor, fiduciary duty. My pen moved steady, the way it used to when grading papers late into the night. Each word was a weapon, each definition a bullet I'd load when the time came. Halfway through the afternoon, I felt that flicker again, that breath of revenge filling my lungs. I almost stopped there, almost. But what I did instead shocked even me. I pulled out my phone and typed Marcus Hale's name into the public records database. Old habits die hard. When you're a teacher, you learn how to dig for the truth, whether it's hidden in a student's excuse or a dusty file. It didn't take long to find him. 3 companies registered in Georgia, 2 more in Delaware, all with variations of the same name. Shells, stacked one inside the other, like Russian dolls with smiling faces. Perfectly legal, perfectly designed to keep a father out. But I noticed something else. One of the companies, Hale and Riverstone Investments, wasn't registered until 2 weeks before David's Vegas trip. 2 weeks. That wasn't luck. That was preparation. Marcus had been waiting for my son to hit it big, maybe even feeding the dream, pushing him toward it like a gambler whispering in the ear of a drunk. I copied down the registration date, the address, the signatures. Proof doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. That evening, I returned to the friendly motor lodge and ironed my shirt again, even though the fabric was starting to show lines no heat could smooth. Routine is armor. A man who keeps his collar straight keeps his mind straight. I laid Lorna's scarf on the bed and spoke to it softly, the way I used to speak to her. They think they've buried me, but they forgot I know how to grow in the dark. The next morning, I made my way back to the house. David greeted me on the porch, cautious, hopeful. "Dad, you came back. I told you I would." Inside, Marcus wasn't there, but Lydia hovered like perfume, her smile sharp but practiced. She offered coffee and I took it this time, bitter, overbrewed. "I've been thinking," I said carefully. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should let you handle things. I'm not built for this world." David looked almost relieved. "That's good, Dad. You'll be taken care of. I'll make sure." I let him believe it. Sometimes the cruelest kindness is silence. While he spoke about cars and condos, I studied the room. I noticed the books on the coffee table, expensive tomes about art and wine, still wrapped in plastic. I noticed Lydia's phone, face down, but buzzing every few minutes with messages she didn't answer in front of me. And I noticed the way David kept glancing at the hallway, as if expecting Marcus to appear and rescue him from the weight of my presence. That told me all I needed to know. My son wasn't the leader here. He was the student. Marcus was the teacher now, and it was time for me to remind them both what a real teacher could do. I excused myself after an hour, claiming I needed rest. David hugged me, awkward, quick, and I let him. Outside, the air was sharp with the promise of rain. I walked not toward the diner but toward the courthouse. Inside, the records office hummed with the quiet efficiency of bureaucracy. I requested files on the Hale companies, smiling politely at the clerk who handed them over. Paperwork doesn't lie, even when people do. And there it was again, Hale and Riverstone Investments, registered with David's signature as a junior partner. My son hadn't even read what he was signing. His handwriting, messy and rushed, sat next to Marcus's elegant script. Trusts, foundations, advisory boards, all roads led back to Marcus. I folded the copies into my bag, my hands steady. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to throw keys or slam doors. I had something far more dangerous than anger. I had evidence. When I left the courthouse, a black SUV was parked across the street, tinted windows, engine running. I recognized it from the day before. It didn't move as I walked past, but I felt the eyes behind the glass, watching, measuring. I smiled, then I tipped my hat, just as I used to when greeting my students after school. Let them wonder what lesson I was about to teach. That night, back in my motel room, I spread the documents across the bedspread like test papers waiting for grades. Red pen in hand, I circled dates, underlined signatures, annotated margins. By the time I finished, Marcus Hale had earned a failing grade in honesty, integrity, and decency. But the real test hadn't started yet, because tomorrow I would go back to Etta's diner, and I would place those papers on the table between us. Not for her, for the man sitting 2 booths away, pretending to read a newspaper. A man I didn't know yet, but one I'd noticed watching me more than once. I had a feeling he wasn't working for Marcus. He wasn't working for David either. No, this man belonged to someone else entirely. And if I was right, then I wasn't the only one who wanted Marcus Hale to fall. The morning light slid across the counter at Etta's diner, catching on the sugar jars and the small stack of menus that had seen better years. I sat in my usual booth with the courthouse papers folded neatly at my side, untouched coffee steaming in front of me. A man 3 booths down pretended to read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He had done the same yesterday. Same coffee, never touched. Same eyes, glancing over the paper's edge just enough for me to notice. Teachers learn to see what others miss. The shift of a pencil, the pause in a sentence, the lie in the homework excuse. This man was no customer. He was a question mark in a worn leather jacket. Etta brought me eggs and toast, her bracelets chiming. She set the plate down and leaned closer. "He's back," she whispered, without even looking. "I know. What do you want me to do? Let him think he's invisible." I buttered my toast calmly, as if we weren't discussing the man who'd been shadowing me like a second skin. He'll get tired of waiting, and when he does, I'll be ready. Half an hour later, I rose, tucked the courthouse documents back into my bag, and walked slowly toward the door. The man folded his newspaper, left cash on the table, and followed at a distance. I didn't lead him to the motel. I led him to Grant Park, where the air smelled of damp earth and dogwood trees. Children's laughter carried across the green, and joggers moved in steady rhythms around the trails. A good place for secrets to walk in daylight. I sat on a bench beneath the statue of Thomas Glenn, the Confederate soldier with moss growing on his boots. A bitter kind of irony, sitting in the shadow of a man who fought the wrong war. I lit the last of my pipe tobacco, the smoke curling like thoughts too stubborn to leave. He approached finally, cautious but inevitable, mid-40s, hair cropped close, posture of someone who'd spent years obeying orders and never quite learned how to stop. He sat 2 benches away at first, then closer. "You don't look surprised," he said. "I taught high school for 30 years, I replied. "You can't surprise a man who's graded essays at 2 in the morning. That earned a faint smile. He reached into his jacket, not fast, not threatening, and slid a small card onto the bench between us. I didn't touch it yet. The card said nothing but a name, Daniel Ross. "Mr. Williams," he said quietly, "I'm not here to hurt you. Quite the opposite. Then why the shadows? Why the newspapers you don't read? Because Marcus Hale doesn't like witnesses. And right now, you're the only one who can see the whole board." I studied him. "Who do you work for, Daniel?" "A firm out of DUI, he said. "Private investigations. We've been following Marcus for almost 2 years. Offshore accounts, shell companies, political donations funneled through charities. He's clever, careful, but he's greedy, and greedy men always leave crumbs." I tapped the edge of my pipe against the bench. "And you think I'm holding some of those crumbs?" He nodded. "The trust papers, David's signature. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing, baiting a boy who didn't understand the cost. We can use that, but we need you to help us." I laughed softly, not with humor but with the dry rasp of disbelief. "You want me to help bring down my son?" "No," he said quickly. "We want to bring down Marcus. And to do that, we have to protect David from himself." Protect David? The phrase stung like vinegar on an open wound. My son had thrown me out of my own house, laughed in my face, but under the pride and the poison, he was still the boy with dandelions in his hand. Still my son. "What happens if you fail?" I asked. Daniel's eyes didn't blink. "Then Marcus controls not just David's fortune, but everything it touches, and that's more dangerous than you realize." I picked up the card at last, turned it over in my hand, blank on the back. Clean, like a lie still waiting to be told. "If I do this," I said, "it's not for your firm. It's not for Washington. It's not even for the money. It's for a boy who forgot his own reflection." "That's enough," Daniel said. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that builds bridges instead of walls. When I rose, I slid the card into my pocket and left without another word. That evening, back in the motel, I spread the trust papers out again, but this time, I read them not as a father, not even as a betrayed man. I read them as a teacher preparing a lesson plan. If Marcus had built his empire on signatures and shells, then I would build my revenge on the same foundation. The next morning, I returned to the house. David opened the door, smiling like a man who'd convinced himself yesterday's sins had expired overnight. "Dad, come in. Lydia's making tea." Inside, the house smelled different. Lemon polish, fresh flowers, too carefully arranged, too staged. Marcus wasn't there. I let David chatter, let him play host in his own kingdom. But when he stepped away to answer a call, I noticed a thin folder left on the edge of the dining table. My hand moved before thought could catch it. I slid the folder open just enough to glimpse the letterhead. "Confidential memorandum, transfer of assets." My son's name was there, and under it, a clause that made my blood run cold. In the event of incapacity or premature death, all assets revert to the trustee, not to David's estate, not to his heirs, to the trustee, Marcus Hale. My fingers tightened on the folder until the paper wrinkled. Then I heard footsteps. I closed it, set it exactly where it had been, and lifted my coffee cup just as David reappeared, still smiling, still blind. I nodded at him. calm as stone, because I knew then the truth was darker than I imagined. Marcus wasn't just using David, he was planning for his end, and that was the moment I understood. My revenge wasn't just about dignity anymore, it was about survival. I left the house that morning with my hands steady, but inside my chest the truth was beating like a fist against the walls of a coffin. Marcus hadn't just trapped David with contracts, he'd planted a seed that would bloom the moment David stumbled, the moment fate or a convenient accident took him away. On the porch, I paused and turned back. My son stood in the doorway, waving like the boy who once begged me to stay for one more story at bedtime. He didn't know the wolves at his table were sharpening knives meant for him. I nodded and walked on, the brass clock heavy in my pocket, ticking like a conscience that refused to stay quiet. At the diner, Etta poured coffee and leaned across the counter. "You look like a man who just read his own obituary." "Not mine," I said. "My son's." Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak. She knew better than to push a wound before it's ready to bleed. "I need a phone call," I said. "Private." She handed me the diner's old rotary, the one that still hummed with a metallic ring. I dialed the number on Daniel Ross's card. He answered on the second ring. "You were right," I told him. "Marcus isn't just after the money. He's planning for what happens when David isn't around to claim it." Daniel was silent for a long breath. "Do you have proof?" I read it, a clause buried in the papers. "If David dies, Marcus inherits it all." "That's leverage," Daniel said. "But we'll need more than your word." "I know, and I'm going to get it." I hung up and returned to my coffee, hands folded. Revenge is patient, but patience doesn't mean stillness. It means moving so slowly the prey never sees the net lowering. The next day, I asked David to join me for breakfast at Etta's. He looked surprised but agreed, arriving in a tailored suit that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, not in a diner that smelled of bacon and bleach. "Dad," he said, sliding into the booth, "you could have picked somewhere nicer." "Sometimes the nicest places are the ones that serve you like family," I replied. Etta brought pancakes, steaming and golden. David picked at his plate, distracted. "Marcus says I should be careful where I go. Too many cameras, too many people watching. He says not everyone wants the best for me." "He's right," I said, carefully. "But the ones you should be afraid of aren't out there. They're closer than you think." David frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Have you actually read the contracts you've signed with Marcus?" He stiffened. "Of course." He explained them. "Explained or interpreted?" He shook his head. "Dad, not this again. Marcus knows what he's doing. Lydia too. They're professionals. They're professionals at protecting themselves," I said. "If something happens to you, anything, your money goes straight into Marcus's hands. Every penny." His fork clattered onto the plate. For a moment I saw doubt in his eyes. Then his jaw tightened. "That's not true. It's written in black and white." He leaned back, folding his arms. "You hate him. You always have. You can't stand that I found someone who sleeps in your house and builds an empire with your name but not your control." I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to slice. "I don't hate him, David. I fear him. And you should too." David stood abruptly, leaving the pancakes untouched. "This is exactly why Marcus says you can't be trusted. You're jealous, bitter. You'd rather see me poor than admit someone else might be helping me." He left the diner without another word. The bell over the door rang like a funeral toll. Etta set down the coffee pot, shaking her head. "That boy's blind as a bat in sunlight. Then I'll be the shadow that shows him the shape of what's real," I said. That night, I returned to the motel and thought long about the next step. I couldn't push David headfirst into the truth. He'd reject it. No, I had to let Marcus expose himself. And for that, I needed bait. The following week, I played the fool exactly as planned. I accepted Marcus's invitation to dinner, smiled politely at Lydia's questions, nodded at David's boasts about cars and properties. I spoke little, watched much. The house smelled of money and polish, but under it all was something rotten. After dinner, Marcus led David into the office for business, leaving Lydia to play hostess. She poured me wine, but her eyes were elsewhere, her fingers typing rapid messages into her phone. When she excused herself, I rose silently and drifted toward the office door. It was cracked open just enough. Voices leaked through. "Don't worry," Marcus was saying. "The clause protects us. If anything happens, illness, accident, it's airtight." David's voice was lower, uncertain. "But nothing's going to happen, right? I mean, you're not saying—" "Relax," Marcus cut in smoothly. "I'm saying you'll live like a king, and if fate ever intervenes, the crown won't fall to strangers. That's love, David. Protection." My hand tightened on the doorknob. Every muscle in me screamed to burst in, drag my son out, lay the truth bare. But patience held me still. A teacher never shouts the answer before the student's ready to learn. When footsteps approached, I slipped back into the living room, picking up my glass as if I'd never moved. Lydia returned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus followed soon after, his hand on David's shoulder like a leash disguised as affection. I left soon after, walking into the night air that tasted of metal and rain. My pocket buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A photo appeared, Marcus and Lydia at the office table, papers spread before them. David's head bowed, pen in hand. The caption was short, chilling. He's signing his future away tonight. I stopped on the sidewalk, the glow of the screen burning into my palm. Whoever had sent that wasn't Marcus, wasn't Lydia, maybe not even Daniel. Someone else was watching, someone with access inside. For the first time since this began, I felt not just the fire of revenge but the cold steel of fear. Because if Marcus was willing to speak of David's death behind closed doors, then the next signature might not just steal his money, it might seal his fate. And I knew then, waiting was no longer an option. The time for patience had ended. The time for war had begun. I didn't sleep the night the photo arrived, not because of the fear in it, but because of the clock. The brass ticked a steady sermon from the nightstand, each beat reminding me there is a difference between anger and strategy. Anger throws a punch. Strategy sets the table, sharpens the knives, and invites the wolf to sit down. By sunrise, I had a list in my notebook, not a hit list, but a lesson plan. At 8 on the dot, I walked into First Ebenezer, the church that fed us casseroles when Lorna got sick and mowed our lawn when I couldn't lift the mower. Deacon Reggie met me in the foyer with a handshake that felt like a rope tossed to a drowning man. He's a big-shouldered banker in weekday suits and an usher's smile on Sundays. "Brother Clarence," he said, "you look like a man with a complicated prayer." "I've got a son who just won $137 million and a fox guarding the henhouse," I said. "I need to understand how to put a pause on a machine that doesn't like to stop." We sat in the side office where the Sunday school crayons live, and he listened while I laid out the pieces: trusts, shell firms, signatures David didn't read, and a clause that pays out to the trustee if my boy can't speak for himself. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw. "I can't be your banker today," he said, "but I can be your friend who knows how banks think. If David signs anything revoking prior powers and asking for a 14-day hold on transfers, any decent institution will tap the brakes. Compliance will want daylight. That buys you time." 14 days, I repeated, as if the number might fit in my pocket with the clock, "and a signature he'll only give me if he still recognizes my voice." Reggie leaned forward. "He still hears you. He's forgotten how to listen." I left the church with a modest miracle in my pocket, a template letter Reggie drafted in simple language. No legal fireworks, just a plain request to pause, reconsider, and confirm. It wasn't war, it was a speed bump, but speed bumps save lives. From there, I walked to the high school where I taught 3 decades of boys who thought poems were useless until they made them cry. Mrs. Alvarez still keeps the principal's chair warm, and she hugged me with the fierce tenderness of a woman who's watched me give too many eulogies at too many graduations. "Clarence," she said, "tell me what you need." "Hope," I said, "and a microphone." We planned a small ceremony for Friday evening, a launch for the Lorna Williams Scholarship, something I had wanted for years, but never had the money to do properly. We'd keep it simple, a dozen students, the choir humming, a few words about a woman who taught a gentleman how to stay gentle. Then I called David. "A scholarship in Mom's name?" His voice softened the way souls do when they remember who taught them to pray. "You want me there? I want you to announce it," I said. "Let the kids see you the way I do when you're at your best." Silence swelled. "Marcus will want to look at the optics. I want to look at your heart," I said. "You owe her that." He exhaled. "I'll be there." I hung up and called Daniel Ross. "Friday, 6 p.m., school auditorium," I said. "Bring whatever you need that hears better than human ears." "Understood," he said. "We'll keep a low profile." "I also need a pen," I said, "and a notary." He didn't ask why. Good men know when questions waste time. But I had one more visit to make. On the way back to the motel, I stopped at WCLK's studio on the edge of the AUC campus. Janelle, a producer with an editor's mind and a trumpet player's ear, had been my student when metaphors were bigger than her shoes. She's all grown now, crisp locks, and a laugh that forgives. "Mr. Williams," she said, "the rumor mill says your son is the new pharaoh of Atlanta. You okay?" "I'm not a headline," I said, "but a story might save a boy I love." Friday night. Small human moment, no spectacle. I want the city to hear the choir and remember that wealth isn't the same as worth. She understood. "We'll send a single camera," she said, quiet, respectful, let the sound carry. The week walked past me, and I walked with it. I played the fool in plain sight, letting Lydia usher me around like a prop, nodding at Marcus's jokes, laughing too slowly at all the wrong times. People underestimate men who polish their shoes. They think we spend our days buffing the past. They forget we also sharpen the present. Halfway through the week, a thought tugged the corner of my mind like a child pulling a sleeve. I wrote it down so I wouldn't lose it, then stared at the words until they felt like a new organ in my chest. I thought I was done with surprises, but life had left one waiting right under my own roof. Friday arrived, dressed in sun. The auditorium smelled like floor wax and memories. The choir warmed up with Precious Lord, and I stood in the wings, the brass clock heavy in my pocket, the template letter smooth as skin against my palm. Daniel met me backstage and pinned a small device inside my tie. "It rides the breath," he said. "It'll hear what the human ear misses." "Like a good teacher," I said. From the front row, Etta waved, wearing a blue dress sprigged with tiny white flowers that made my heart hitch for a second with memory. Deacon Reggie sat beside her with a folder in his lap, and that rope of a hand ready if I needed pulling back to shore. Janelle stood near the aisle, a single camera humming on her shoulder, her face set to reverence. David arrived late with Lydia on one side and Marcus on the other, their trio silhouetted against the open doors like a weather system moving in fast. My son looked beautiful in a way that worries a father. The world eats beautiful boys if they don't learn to chew it first. We started simple. Mrs. Alvarez spoke about Lorna's laugh and the way she wove students into quilts of belonging. Etta told a story about a pot of gumbo that fed a neighborhood. The choir's sound filled the room like water filling a dry well. Then I stepped to the microphone. I didn't read what I wrote. I spoke to the air and the boys and the ghosts. I spoke to the woman who isn't here and to the man who is because she once loved him. "My wife," I said, "believed dignity is the quietest sound a person can make. Tonight, we honor that quiet. We honor it with a scholarship that won't announce itself with billboards but will knock on doors and whisper to the boys who think they aren't seen." I turned to my son. "David," I said, and let his name rest on the wood of the stage. "Come stand with me." He came. The auditorium's breath shifted. I put an arm around his shoulders, and for a moment his head tilted toward me the way it did when he was 6 and the thunder wanted to brag. "Your mother loved you before the world learned your name," I said. "Help me love these children in her name." He nodded, eyes bright. I lifted the folder and showed the audience a single page with simple language. Reggie's speed bump turned into a community promise. "Tonight," I said, "David and I will ask the banks to pause. 14 days, no new transfers. In that time, we'll build a truly independent board for this scholarship, with elders and students and teachers, not a foundation for applause, but a bridge that doesn't collapse when cameras go home." Marcus's face didn't change. Lydia's did. A flicker crossed her features so fast most eyes missed it. David looked at the page, then at the audience, then at me. 1,000 small loves looked back from those seats. Cafeteria workers who tucked extra cornbread into boys' trays, custodians who taught algebra after midnight to kids on the edge, teachers who stayed when staying cost them, the city's quiet army. He took the pen. His hand trembled, then steadied. He signed. Applause rose. Not loud, but sure. Janelle's camera drank the sound like a thirsty thing. Deacon Reggie stood and, with the calm of a man who's notarized both joy and sorrow, walked David and me to the side office to stamp the paper with a seal that sounds like a door closing softly on a room where ugliness isn't welcome. Outside the office, Marcus waited with a smile that would break if you tapped it with a spoon. "Beautiful," he said. "Authentic." He shook my hand and, as he did, his thumb pressed the pulse in my wrist like a doctor who doesn't want you to notice where it hurts. "We'll coordinate next steps. Next steps come after the pause," I said. We agreed. He blinked once, slowly. Of course. The reception was in the cafeteria, red punch in glass bowls, ham biscuits stacked like little promises, the choir laughing like they'd broken curfew. Etta hugged David in the line and slipped him a napkin that said proud in big ink pen letters. Lydia floated from table to table, performing competence, collecting compliments like a careful bee. I kept my feet moving. A teacher knows to see the corners, not just the center. I noticed a white envelope propped against a vase of supermarket roses near the sheet cake. It had no name, just the neat hand of someone taught to write when handwriting still mattered. I slid it into my jacket without breaking my stride. I would read it when noise couldn't eavesdrop. Daniel brushed my sleeve as he passed. The tie heard what I hoped it would, he murmured. "Marcus loves the word clause a little too much." "Good," I said. "Let him audition for the jury in advance." Half an hour in, the choir hummed again. and someone brought out a few dusty champagne flutes left from the last retirement party. Lydia clinked a spoon against a glass. A small toast, she smiled. To Lorna's light, glasses lifted. My son's hand shook only a little. I saw movement at the doorway. The custodian, Mr. Booker, with 2 foil trays and a breathless apology. He'd found them in the warmer so they wouldn't go to waste. As everyone turned toward the biscuits, I stepped into the hallway, the envelope a quiet burn in my pocket. Under the fluorescence, I broke the seal. Inside, a single-page printout and a sticky note, the letters small and careful. The printout was a calendar invite. Subject line, medical evaluation, executive coverage, participant, David Williams, location, private suite, Peachtree Tower, time, Saturday 8 a.m., provider, Arcadia Risk. The sticky note said, not a doctor, policy tied to trustee, do not let him go alone. I looked up. In the glass of the trophy case, the cafeteria reflected back to me in a moving collage. My son laughing at something Etta said, Lydia pouring champagne with a wrist that knew its own beauty, Marcus tapping at his phone with the serene gravity of a man who already owned tomorrow. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number. A new photo. A glossy brochure cover. Accidental death and specified loss rider. David's name peeking from the corner where a hand hadn't fully covered it. And under the image, 3 words that tasted like rust. Green light confirmed. I walked back into the cafeteria with my spine straight as a ruler. The choir finished a verse and quiet fell. I tapped my glass with a fork. A gentle call for attention. Marcus turned toward me, smiling as if we were old friends speaking of golf. Before we drink, I said, my voice easy as a Sunday. A housekeeping note. David, son, tomorrow morning a so-called medical evaluation is scheduled in a place where medicine doesn't live. You won't be attending that. The room held its breath like a child underwater. Marcus laughed. Rich and warm. Clarence, please. Executive policies require routine exams. Entirely standard. We defer to professionals. I defer to mine, I said, and nodded. Daniel had entered the cafeteria as silently as a memory, and he lifted his hand enough for Marcus to see the badge he never had to show fully to make a point. Lydia's eyes snapped to the envelope in my hand. The performance slipped. Something naked and human looked out. Regret? Fear? Whatever it wasn't PR. David stared at me, the way he used to when I caught him with a lie in his pocket and mercy in my other hand. Dad, he said slowly, what's going on? Tomorrow, I said. Men who are not doctors want to draw lines around your life for a policy that doesn't love you. I'm asking you to sleep in. We'll have pancakes instead. Marcus's smile thinned until you could read through it. This is absurd, he said lightly. We'll talk later. Let's do it now, I said. Etta coughed. The choir's alto hummed a note she couldn't hold alone. In the corner of my eye, I saw Janelle's camera light tilt and steady. Every story has a second when it decides what kind it wants to be. This was ours. I stepped closer to my son and touched his elbow. He didn't pull away. You signed a pause, I said softly. Honor it with your mourning. His shoulders sagged, then squared. He nodded. Small but real. No exam, he said to the room. Not tomorrow. A hiss of air left Marcus like a tire losing patience. Lydia closed her eyes, just for a beat, and when she opened them there was a decision inside. She set her glass down, took a clean napkin from the stack, and wrote a number on it. She slid it across the table to me as if handing over salt. Call me tonight, she whispered. Not on my work phone. I looked down. A personal cell, the kind you keep for family, not clients. When I looked up, she was already putting her mask back on for the crowd. We made it through the toast with cider instead of champagne, which felt right for a school that has seen too many kids learn too early that bubbles lie. People clapped and ate and told stories. The building exhaled. The city put its hand on our back and said, keep going, old man. After, when the chairs were stacked and the last of the choir drifted toward parents with warm cars, I walked the quiet hall to the front doors. The night air had that clean bite that reminds a body it's still alive. Daniel joined me on the steps. You pushed hard, he said. Hardness is wasted unless it lands on the soft spot, I said. He nodded toward my jacket. What was in the envelope? Proof of an exam that isn't, for a policy that pays the wrong man. I handed him the printout. He scanned it, his jaw working like a man trying to chew anger into something digestible. We'll be there in the morning, he said. We'll make it official if they try. They won't, I said. They'll pivot. Marcus always does. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a saved number. David, a single line. Come over, just us. No Marcus, no Lydia. Midnight. I stared at the words and felt something I hadn't felt since before Vegas rewired the map of my son's soul. Trust. Not big, not boastful. Small as a wick and just as bright. I walked to the parking lot where Etta waited in her Civic like a cathedral with seatbelts. You hungry? She asked. Always. We split a container of fried chicken on the hood of the car like teenagers with good knees. She licked her fingers and smiled. He signed, she said. The whole room felt it. The room is a witness, I said. Witnesses save lives. When I got to David's house just before midnight, the street was quieter than a secret. I let myself in with the key he'd given me years ago and taken back and given again. The foyer smelled not of lemon polish now, but of something like rain left inside. A lamp burned in the living room. My son sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He looked up when I stepped in, and for a breath I saw the boy who once counted lightning with me out loud so it would know we weren't afraid. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words could build a city. Before I could cross the room, a soft thud came from down the hall. Not the door, not the stairs, the office. We moved at the same time, down the hallway, past the brutal art that has never learned what beauty costs, to the office door that had learned too many new words. It stood ajar. Inside, the printer hummed like a cat with a bad idea, spitting out a thick packet into a tray already holding 3. On the desk lay a leather folder embossed in gold. I opened it and felt the bottom fall out of the world. A notarized medical power of attorney bearing my son's name, shaky but his, dated that afternoon, and a transfer directive scheduled for 9 a.m. Saturday instructing the family office to move 8 figures into a newly minted account under a Cayman shell with a name so bland it should have been a confession. Behind us, footsteps in the hall. Lydia stood in the doorway, hair pulled back, no performance on her face. She looked at the papers, then at us, and her voice was a raw whisper I had never heard from her before. "I didn't send the envelope," she said, "but I sent the first photo, and if you don't leave this house in the next 5 minutes, both of you, there won't be a morning to save." I should have left when Lydia warned us. Pride is a patient liar. It whispers that if you run now, you'll never know if you could have saved the thing that matters. So I stayed. I didn't stay because I'm brave. I stayed because I'm a father, and fathers are stubborn in the particular way that bends miracles into presence. Lydia's voice folded into the room like paper. "They'll make it look like an accident," she said, and for the first time I saw the calculation behind the polish, not perfume and posture, but logistics, timing, an insurance rider waiting to be triggered. The room had narrowed to the size of a matchbox. My son's eyes were wet and small and terribly real. "Why would you send the photo?" I asked Lydia without heat. She swallowed. "Because I couldn't stand watching it happen." The admission landed like a coin on a church floor. Loud, impossible not to hear. Marcus's face, somewhere between fury and a man hearing a verdict, had changed the room's temperature by 10 degrees. He moved forward slowly, the kind of movement that practices menace like a monologue. "We leave," I said to David, and the small syllable meant more than a footstep. He reached for his jacket as if gathering courage from cloth. Lydia stepped back, the mask settling into place like a rehearsed expression. Marcus didn't move. He seemed to be measuring the exact angle that would make his smile useful. Daniel pressed his phone to my palm, and the small blue light showed maps, timestamps, driver's routes. "Arcadia Risk," he read aloud, "is a shell for a paramedical firm with ties to a Cayman account." He looked up. "They've used ambulances with Mr. X before in other states." The word "before" had the brittle taste of history that likes to repeat in the homes of men who forget they are playing with other lives. That's when I decided to do something they would never forgive me for. I tasted the plan before I named it. It was not a grand gesture. It was paperwork and presence and the slow squeezing of daylight across a room where deceit had cherished shadow. I would not fight them at their game with shouts and headlines. I would teach them the kind of public arithmetic they hate. Transparency multiplied by witnesses. We did the small things first. Daniel arranged for an official notation, a hold placed on any transfer until a full forensic review could be completed. The bank, surprised and bounding with its own compliance scripts, said it required a court order or a signed consent from the account holder. That's where the school morning and my afternoon lessons tightened into a rope. I asked David, quietly, to make another call to the bank. He did so in front of us, voice steady and slow, asking the account manager, whom he named aloud, for a temporary, good faith hold on any transfers until our counsel had reviewed the documents. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Lydia's jaw tightened. Marcus shifted the chessboard into a protection posture. Lawyers, emergency trustees, for David's privacy. But privacy is sticky when you're spending in public. The press we'd invited for the scholarship night, one camera, one local station, had turned into a rope that could pull others in. Janelle ran the audio we'd recorded to a colleague who owed a favor, and the clip of Marcus speaking flippantly about what happens if fate intervenes traveled in the right circles like a bad rumor with receipts. Between Daniel's trackers and the camera's tiny truth, the scaffolding Marcus had built started to creak. I watched Marcus tighten, then pivot. He called a meeting that night, polite and shiny, wine as his lubricant. He invited a small advisory crowd, a lawyer from a firm that smelled like new books, a man with a suit that hoped to be a sanctuary, a friend he'd paid to look like conviction. He spoke of protecting the legacy and preserving reputation, all the words of a man trying to make indecency sound like stewardship. I listened and took notes mentally, the way a teacher takes attendance in chaos. Where he expected fear, I gave him formality. Where he aimed to silence, I gave him witnesses. And then Lydia cracked. It happened in the middle of that evening when she excused herself to make a call and walked to the kitchen, her face unguarded for the first time. Daniel followed, and I let them speak like two surgeons sharing a corridor. When she returned, she was smaller, and the hands that had once written a number on a napkin now trembled when she reached for her glass. "I can bring you what's been hidden," she whispered to me across the clink of crystal. "Names, transfers, the Cayman account routes. I want out of what I helped start." That sentence, "I want out," is a key that fits many locks. People like Marcus count on the inertia of loyalty, the slow friction that keeps accomplices quiet. Lydia's break in the chain was a spyglass turned the other way. She gave us the account logins, a list of shell entities, emails that used coded phrases like medical contingency and final arrangement. She handed me, in a battered manila envelope, the map of their greed. We took the envelope to the prosecutor. I had to stand there, Clarence Williams, retired English teacher, tie still knotted, a brass clock in my pocket, and be a man who could orchestrate the moral economy of a city. The assistant prosecutor blinked, adjusted her glasses, and then the room filled with the small engines of law. Papers were filled, warrants typed, subpoenas served like polite shrapnel. Marcus's men began to sweat in boardrooms that smelled of success. I watched his empire start to fold like a man folding a letter with the wrong intention. Neat but doomed. They tried to run. Marcus made noises about betrayal, hired a high-priced lawyer who liked to speak in capitals and curt sentences, and Marcus and Lydia exchanged glances that had once been a duet and now looked like the prelude to a trial. Lydia, however, had given us more than paper. She had given testimony that mattered. She spoke of a meeting where medical evaluation had been code for policy activation, where a man had smiled at the thought of a payout, and where Marcus had insisted on two things: control of documents and the physical presence to ensure signatures. Her voice wavered, then grew steady. There is a kind of courage that smells faintly of shame. That is, the courage of someone finally deciding not to be the instrument of another's destruction. We moved like a band of misfit saints. Daniel's private team coordinated with federal investigators. The bank froze transfers under compliance review. The press, fed small and careful truths, began to ask real questions. David, shell-shocked and raw, withdrew from the spectacle and let us protect his margins. He began, slowly, to remember the muscles of his better self, the boy who helped neighbors, the son who listened to his mother's laugh. He began to say no to wilder purchases and yes to therapy. He began to sleep in chairs that weren't bolted to an exterior of fear. The court proceedings were a careful arithmetic of evidence. Marcus's lawyers tried to paint Lydia as a disgruntled employee, me as an embittered father, Daniel as an overreaching private eye. The prosecutor, a woman with a voice like a bell, read emails that ended with green light confirmed, emails that had once been swagger disguised as logistics. Marcus shifted in his chair like a puppet trying to remember how to smile. The jury saw the patterns. They saw the trust documents that had been amended in the margins, signatures that had been coached, and the way the so-called medical evaluations had been scheduled with suspicious speed. There was no gun, no staged car. There didn't need to be. The law moved on the evidence of greed and conspiracy, and greed is clumsy when it must hide in plain paper. Marcus was indicted for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted coercion. His voice, once syrup-smooth, tightened into a croak on the stand. Lydia testified with the kind of humility that sometimes makes God listen. She admitted deceit and offered her file like a contrite historian. David watched all of it from a small chair beside me, his hand sometimes in mine. There were nights he would wake with the smell of fear in his throat, and I would tell him things he needed to hear, that needing help was not weakness, that money could be a tool or a trap, that the real wealth was in the choices he made when no camera watched. He began to volunteer at the scholarship's first meeting. showing a kid how to tie a tie, and that small mercy looked like a man returning home in pieces that could be mended. When the verdict came, it was not a shout, but a settling. Marcus was found guilty on several counts. The judge, an oak-smoothed woman who had the patience of a river, pronounced sentencing that included restitution and a lengthy prison term. Lydia received a lesser sentence for cooperation and was ordered into a program that included therapy and restitution tasks for youth outreach. The Cayman shells were pierced by subpoenas and dry compliance. The $137 million did not evaporate. It was complicated by liens, investigations, and divestments that returned parts of it to the people Marcus had tried to pretend were beneficiaries. Money, after all, follows paper, and paper will tell when it's been coaxed into a lie. In the quiet after so, David and I repaired what years strained. We learned to talk without currency as a third language. We watched movies with popcorn, sat in church, and let the sermon do its slow work. And sometimes we sat in Lorna's garden and simply listened to the sparrows quarrel. He would ask me, in smaller, kinder tones, to tell him about grammar rules or why a comma could change the world. I told him, he listened, and the bargain was humility for patience. People asked me if I felt vindicated. I said no. Vindication sounds like a party for selfishness. What I felt was a slow, warm restoration, like a house when the roof finally stops leaking. I felt relieved that the thing I feared most, my son used as a vessel for other men's fortunes, had not come to pass. I felt thankful for Etta's coffee, for Daniel's patience, for Lydia's late repentance, for the choir's small songs that kept a city soft, even when its edges were hard. I kept the brass clock on my dresser. It still ticked with stubborn grace. Sometimes at night I wind it and pretend the sound is a class beginning. Children, I'd say, as if the room were full of desks. Today we learn that dignity is a practice, not a privilege. The clock didn't answer, but time did what it always does. It moved forward, and in the moving, it taught us how to remember. We did not have a cinematic, weak, sweeping revenge. There was no dramatic poisoning of the villain nor a grand theft of ledgers at midnight. Instead, there were subpoenas, witness statements, and slow legal gravity. Justice in our story was an accumulation of tiny truths, each one nudging the world until it looked more like what it should. My revenge, if you must call it that, was to teach, to show that a father's work is not always to shield by force, but to reveal by patience. And when the city would ask me at events what the secret was, I would smile and say, because I'm a teacher and cannot help myself. Start with a question, then keep asking until someone answers truly. The students nod because teachers set loops people fall into. My son nods because he knows now how to ask. Lydia taught me that sometimes people change when they finally see the shape of themselves in the mirror of consequence. Marcus taught me that money uglifies quick and pretty. Daniel taught me the value of allies who keep their word. We rebuilt, slowly. The scholarship grew like a small tree, sturdy and slow, and David learned to carry his name like something living, not like a plaque. I went back to the classroom a few mornings a week to teach an adult education class on writing, because the best revenge against a world that tried to rewrite your story is to write better sentences. In those rooms, I told stories. I read a line from Lorna's old letters and watched men in their 60s wipe their eyes. That was justice enough to make people feel and then to make them act. There are still nights I wake to the brass ticking and the memory of last-minute envelopes. There are still men who believe a few signatures can buy a soul, but I no longer fear the dark corridors of tricks. I have the clock, the children, and a son who knows how to choose men with the same care he shows a book. We live, we teach, and sometimes we forgive. Not to be kind to the greedy, but to be merciful to ourselves. When I tell this story now, I do it quietly, like a lesson. The city listens, because the city remembers. And for anyone who lost a house, a name, or a child to the bright lie of quick fortune, patience taught me a better weapon than anger. It taught me how to wait with eyes open and how to teach a wolf that some rooms have doors locked from the inside. The courtroom closed its doors on Marcus Hale the way a library closes its books, with finality, with dust, with silence. He didn't shout, didn't beg. He simply sat there, jaw tight, as if dignity could be borrowed for a sentencing. Lydia stood on the other side, thinner than the day I met her, her hair pulled back, her hands folded. When the judge read the words, fraud, conspiracy, restitution, Lydia nodded like a student who finally accepted the grade she earned. I didn't cheer. I didn't clap. My son sat beside me, his hand trembling just enough that I covered it with mine. He leaned in, whispered, "It's over, over." I shook my head. "No, son, it's beginning." After the verdict, The city wanted headlines, news vans parked outside, microphones reached for our faces. I told them nothing more than what I told my students every year on the last day of class. Do your reading. The truth is in the pages, not the noise. Then I walked past the cameras with David at my side, his head bent but his shoulders lighter than they had been in months. That evening, we went home. Not his new house, cold as a showroom, full of Marcus's shadow, but the old house, the one on Auburn Avenue, with the peeling porch rail and the living room wall that still carried the faint smell of Lorna's candles. We'd rented it to cousins after David struck gold in Vegas, but when they moved out, it sat empty, waiting like a room that refused to forget. We walked through the door together. Dust motes drifted in the sunlight, catching on the edges of photographs still nailed to the walls. Lorna's smile looked back at us from the mantel, a reminder that love survives even when money tries to erase it. David touched the frame with his fingertips and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I let him have that moment. Silence is sometimes the only language a wound understands. In the weeks that followed, we lived slowly. David didn't run to the casinos or the luxury showrooms. He ran to the scholarship meetings, where teenagers with borrowed blazers and trembling voices stood in line to shake his hand. At first, he didn't know what to say. He'd offer short answers, nervous smiles, but by the third meeting I heard him telling a boy about resilience, about not letting pride write checks your soul couldn't cash. I stood in the back of the room, listening, and thought, this is my son again. One night, he came to me on the porch with a box in his arms. Inside were papers, contracts, accounts, titles. "I want you to have these," he said. "I don't need them," I told him. "I know. That's why I can trust you with them." His eyes were wet. "Teach me how to carry this without it crushing me." So I did. We sat at the kitchen table, side by side, going line by line through his finances. I explained the words Marcus had twisted: irrevocable, fiduciary, grantor. We turned them from weapons into lessons. For the first time, money stopped being a language of power and became a subject, like English or history. He took notes in the margins, asking questions the way he once asked about Shakespeare. That was the real inheritance, not the money, but the literacy of dignity. Etta came by most evenings with a pie or a casserole, sitting with us on the porch while the cicadas sang. She teased David the way only an elder can, calling him Vegas Pharaoh until he laughed so hard he dropped his fork. Laughter came back into our house like a tenant we thought we'd lost. One Sunday morning after church, I found David in the backyard with a hammer, fixing the old fence that had leaned for years. Sweat streaked his shirt, his hands clumsy but determined. "You could hire someone for that," I said. "I could," he replied, striking the nail, "but I'd rather do it myself." That's when I knew he had come back, not to me, not even to himself, but to the lesson his mother had taught both of us. Dignity is the quietest sound a person can make. Months later, the scholarship awarded its first class, 15 students, most the children of janitors, cafeteria workers, single mothers who hadn't stopped believing in their boys. The ceremony was held in the school auditorium, the same place where David once signed the 14-day pause that saved his life. The choir sang, the community clapped, and when David stepped to the microphone, his voice was steady. "My name is David Williams," he began. "You may know me from the papers, from Vegas, from headlines, but I want you to know me from here, from this stage, from this community, from this promise. I lost myself once. My father helped me find the map back, and today, I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure none of you ever lose your way." I stood in the wings, the brass clock in my pocket, ticking like applause. That night, after the students went home, David and I sat on the porch. The air was warm, the stars faint behind the city lights. He turned to me and said, "Dad, do you forgive me?" I thought long before answering. Forgiveness isn't a word you say once. It's a practice, like dignity. Every day we wake up and decide whether to carry it. Some days we fail, some days we succeed. Tonight, I forgive you. Tomorrow, I'll decide again. He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. I'll earn it, every day, and he has. Now, when I look at him, I don't see the boy who laughed as he threw me out of my own house. I see the man who stood beside me as we rebuilt it. I see my wife's legacy living in his voice. I see a city full of boys who will go to college because he learned what money cannot buy. And when I tell this story, as I'm telling it to you now, I don't tell it for pity or applause. I tell it because maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe you've been humiliated. Maybe you've been thrown out of your own house, literally or otherwise, by the very people you sacrificed for. If that's you, hear me. Dignity is never stolen. It waits, patient, until you decide to pick it up again. Before I close, I want to ask you something personal. Where are you listening from? Your city, your state? Write it in the comments below. Because stories like mine don't belong to one man or one house or one fortune. They belong to all of us who've ever been hurt and still found a way to stand tall. And if my story meant something to you, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories of resilience, betrayal, and quiet revenge. Stories that remind us that age doesn't end the fight. It sharpens it. The brass clock is ticking beside me as I say this, and I'll leave you with the same words I leave my son every night before we part. Dignity isn't a gift, it's a choice. And tonight, you get to choose it too.